Midway through our tale, the most electrifying moment erupts. Heavily armed members of Cartel Soberano turn Belinda's orchard into an all-out battleground. With bullets striking trees and smoke clouding the moonlit rows, nobody is safe, especially not the unassuming single mom who is secretly an ex-IIS operative. But how did we reach this heart-stopping point of no return? And what will become of Belinda's carefully shielded double life now that the cartel seems determined to pry out her hidden past? Stick around to find out the full scope of danger, intrigue, and courage that unfolds next. And if you're new here, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support not only encourages us to share more thrilling stories, but also helps you stay up to date with each gripping installment. Now let's push onward to see how Belinda faces the turmoil boiling within her orchard and beyond. In the unremarkable border town of San Esteban, Texas, a seemingly ordinary woman named Belinda Ortega has spent nearly a decade overseeing her orchard and raising her teenage daughter alone. Outwardly, Belinda appears much like any other hardworking single parent, modest, quiet, and dedicated. Yet beneath her gentle demeanor resides the person she once was. Daisy Quinn, a highly trained operative for the International Intelligence Service, IIS, a clandestine agency that required her to master covert tactics, unarmed combat, and the art of vanishing without a trace. Daisy had been one of the most effective agents in the IIS's Black Operations Division, a specter involved in missions so classified they remained hidden from all but a select few. Years ago, when she discovered she was pregnant, Daisy chose a new life for the sake of her child, forging the identity of Belinda Ortega and relocating to a remote property on the outskirts of San Esteban. She purchased a small orchard, meticulously transforming it into a productive farm and a refuge for her and her daughter, Victoria. Everything changed one evening when heavily armed men arrived under the cover of darkness. They belonged to Cartel Soberano, a ruthless criminal network infamous for its reach throughout Mexico and certain pockets of the American Southwest. Though they had gained a fearsome reputation for eliminating anyone who opposed them, the cartel's top leadership had one weakness they could never anticipate: an unassuming orchard keeper who was, in fact, a lethal former operative. Unknown to them, Belinda, Daisy Quinn, once disrupted one of Cartel Soberano's pivotal smuggling routes in a prior mission. In that earlier life, she had seized critical data detailing the cartel's financial dealings and relationships with corrupt officials. Most of that intelligence had been passed on to the IIS in the usual classified manner. But one piece of evidence, rumored to hold a trove of devastating information, remained unaccounted for: a small digital drive emblazoned with a silver falcon icon. This drive allegedly contained names of compromised American officials, from local deputies to senior intelligence agents. Since the operation ended in secrecy, the top leadership of Cartel Soberano never forgot the possibility that someone, somewhere, still possessed that piece of incriminating data. The quiet orchard Belinda worked so hard to maintain was now about to become a battleground. In the days leading up to the attack, Sheriff Franklin Davis of San Esteban had dropped by her property to warn about strange movements in the area. Davis, a man in his late 50s who had enough experience to trust his instincts, had mentioned suspicious vehicles parked along deserted county roads, men drifting in from out of state, and a general sense of tension among longtime residents who were too afraid to speak. When Davis advised Belinda to be careful, encouraging her to lock her doors and consider moving elsewhere for a few weeks, she responded with a polite nod, but silently calculated more advanced preparations. She checked her orchard's perimeter sensors, disguised as ordinary irrigation monitors, and tested an old emergency trunk hidden under a creaky floorboard in her workshop. The trunk contained a small arms cache and a single outdated phone, separate from the orchard's landline. It was a phone she hoped never to use again. For 8 years, Daisy Quinn had remained dormant inside Belinda Ortega, overshadowed by the day-to-day concerns of a single mother raising a bright, spirited girl. Victoria, now 16, was blossoming, balancing school, friends, and chores around the orchard. She understood her mother's cautious nature, but had never seen Belinda as anything but a caring, if sometimes overprotective, parent. Yet, when unknown vehicles began traversing the nearby roads at strange hours, And as bellicose rumors of a cartel presence intensified, Belinda found it impossible to ignore the possibility that her old life had finally found her. In the face of an imminent threat, she steeled herself to do whatever it took to protect Victoria. That determination would soon be tested in ways neither mother nor daughter could have imagined. That fateful night started like most others. Belinda bid Victoria good night, meticulously checked all the locks, and stood by a window, with the lights turned off, just listening. The orchard's rows, neatly planted with fruit trees of various kinds, usually provided a soothing sense of order, even as a faint breeze rustled their leaves. She heard the soft hoot of an owl, an occasional frog's croak, and the distant hum of a single passing truck. Then, around midnight, every hair on the back of her neck rose in warning. The orchard's night birds went silent, and the normal wind-driven murmurs of foliage seemed to vanish. In that pregnant silence, she caught the faint purr of engines stopping on the unpaved road past her orchard fence. From a second-floor window, Belinda spotted the intrusion. Multiple shadowy figures hopped out of three large SUVs with their headlights switched off. They fanned out into a tactical formation reminiscent of a well-rehearsed military drill. Their posture was neither casual nor hesitant. They moved with a purpose, hugging shadows and gesturing with gloved hands, an unmistakable sign of specialized training. Belinda felt a momentary flash of adrenaline. She recognized the method. These were men trained to handle dangerous operations with speed and precision. Long-forgotten reflexes in her mind sparked to life, analyzing angles, counting targets, identifying vantage points. She counted at least 10, armed with rifles and sidearms. This was not some group of petty criminals hoping to scare a lone farm owner. It was a structured strike team. She murmured Cartel Soberano, half to herself. Though not entirely certain, Belinda had strong reasons to believe it was them. No local crew would ever muster such manpower for a simple intimidation, and it confirmed her deepest fear. They had come specifically for her. Perhaps someone had connected the orchard owner in San Esteban with the agent from the IIS who disappeared years ago. That meant her identity as Daisy Quinn had been compromised. More importantly, it suggested they believed she still possessed that digital drive containing a wealth of incriminating information. How they learned about her presence here remained a mystery, but the immediate danger demanded her total focus. Before heading upstairs, Belinda removed a false bottom from a drawer in the kitchen to retrieve a sidearm. Years of orchard labor had not diminished her skill. Her hands were steady and certain. She had practiced with this handgun monthly, driving out to an abandoned stretch of land near the orchard, ensuring her aim remained precise. Now that preparedness would be tested in the real world once more. If these men were as professional as they appeared, she doubted local law enforcement could arrive fast enough to help. Sheriff Davis had only a handful of deputies scattered across a large county. By the time they reached her orchard, the threat would have come and gone, if not left a trail of destruction. Moving silently through her own home, Belinda flicked a near-invisible switch on the wall. Over the years, she had quietly upgraded her orchard house with hidden security improvements, reinforced doors, bullet-resistant windows, and a network of sensors. She had installed some features during the building's renovation, telling contractors she wanted energy efficiency or stormproofing. In reality, those additions were strategic defensive measures. If these intruders forced an entry, she would be ready. Yet her mind kept circling back to Victoria, who was sleeping upstairs. Belinda crept to her daughter's room, heart pounding. Victoria was fast asleep, oblivious to the approaching menace. Steeling herself, Belinda had no choice but to risk waking her. The orchard was about to become a war zone. She hurriedly stirred Victoria from slumber, whispering urgent instructions. "Stay quiet. No lights. Get your sneakers on and follow me." Victoria, groggy and frightened by her mother's uncharacteristic tone, complied without protest. Belinda led her to a narrow closet at the end of the hallway. It appeared to be a regular storage space filled with boxes, but behind those boxes was a concealed hatch leading to a cramped crawl space. This space was lined with old blankets to dampen sound and had been stocked with bottled water and a small flashlight for emergencies. As Victoria slipped through the gap, she whispered, "Mom, what's happening?" Belinda hesitated for a split second. She wanted to reassure her daughter, to give some explanation that would keep panic at bay. "Some dangerous people are outside. I need you to stay hidden here while I handle them. I'll come back for you when it's safe." Wide-eyed but trusting her mother, Victoria nodded and clutched a small flashlight. Belinda closed the hatch, recamouflaged the closet entrance with boxes, and made her way toward the top of the stairs. Every footstep was deliberate, each breath contained. In her mind, she reverted to Daisy Quinn, the incisive, disciplined operative who had infiltrated hostile compounds and extracted key figures under withering fire. Only now the battleground was her home, and the hostage to fortune was her beloved daughter. Outside, the intruders established a perimeter. Belinda glanced through the upstairs window to see them spread out around the orchard, each movement purposeful. She noticed the telltale sign of advanced night vision gear, the slow, methodical scanning of men confident they could see in the dark. They likely believed they were dealing with an easy target, maybe even a frightened mother who would surrender the moment they kicked in a door. That belief would soon be shattered. Her security cameras, though discreet, offered a glimpse of the men's chatter through a small earpiece she kept. They had tech-savvy experts using short-range encrypted radios, and from her vantage, she caught only fragments of hushed commands. Secure the rear. Check the side entrance. Keep watch for movement. This was a formidable group. If Belinda rushed them in a frontal assault, she'd be outgunned. A tactical approach was her only choice. She needed to exploit their assumption that she was a defenseless civilian. Belinda initiated her orchard's first line of defense, a couple of hidden tripwires running across 2 orchard rows. When the time came, those wires would trigger decoy flares and small flashbangs, hopefully creating confusion. She had practiced this arrangement in her mind many times, ensuring that no bystander would get harmed if they ever went off unexpectedly. In her orchard, she had the advantage. Every grove, every tool shed, every irrigation pipe was placed there by her own hand, or at least under her supervision. Soon she heard forced footsteps on the porch below. One intruder tested the doorknob, then pounded on it with the butt of his rifle. Another slid around the corner, presumably to access the back. Belinda knew they would break in from multiple points, standard procedure for a group that didn't want to get cornered. She steadied her breathing, recalling the countless training sessions on room clearing and vantage strategy. This was no different, only now she was defending instead of infiltrating. A thunderous crash echoed through the house as the door gave way. 3 men dressed in dark fatigue gear swept into the living room, guns raised. Belinda knelt at the top of the stairs, hidden behind a solid wooden banister. She aimed her sidearm carefully at the lead figure. Though her first instinct was to shoot, she instead pressed a thumb against a silent remote clipped to her belt. This activated the orchard's decoy traps outside. Abruptly, 4 bright flares ignited in the orchard, sending men scrambling and shouting in confusion. 2 flashbangs popped near the perimeter, jarring the night with heavy bursts of light and noise. With the men in the living room momentarily distracted by the clamor outside, Belinda fired twice. The lead intruder dropped as a bullet struck his leg, and the second shot whizzed past the next man's shoulder. The second intruder hit the floor, seeking cover behind a couch. The third spun around, returning fire blindly up the stairs. Belinda ducked, hearing bullets splinter the banister. She exhaled carefully, her sense of time slowing to a practiced crawl. She needed to avoid a direct firefight if possible. She kicked open a door that led into a spare bedroom, moving swiftly. She had planned for a retreat path that connected the second floor to a separate set of steps going down to the side door. As she moved, she could hear the men shouting into their radios. "We have contact! Hostile occupant! This is not the simple retrieval we expected." Another voice barked orders. "Maintain position. Push in from the east side. We must retrieve the package." The mention of a package confirmed they believed she was in possession of something, likely that critical drive. Reaching a small landing, Belinda stepped onto a built-in ladder concealed behind a shelf. It took her to the workshop adjacent to the house. Once outside the main structure, she found herself in near darkness, except for the flickering light from the orchard flares. She spotted 3 more Cartel soldiers rushing toward the front door, weapons at the ready. She pressed herself flat against the side of the building, letting them pass. The orchard was alive with shouting and movement. She estimated at least a dozen men overall. Her earlier count of 10 was conservative. She had to draw them out, reduce their numbers, and avoid letting them coordinate effectively. The orchard offered countless hiding spots among the rows of trees, and she intended to use every advantage. Slipping through a side gate, she made a dash into the orchard. The men's voices grew more distant as they converged near the front door, presumably to storm the interior. If they believed she was still inside, that assumption would work to her benefit. Checking a small control box on a post near the irrigation line, she verified everything was in order for her next fallback measure. Her mind flicked to Victoria, hidden in that crawl space. She trusted the girl to remain silent, but fear gnawed at her hearing. If any of these men discovered Victoria, the consequences would be devastating. Belinda had to ensure they never made it upstairs again. If they thought she was outside, maybe they'd keep their focus on the orchard. She moved quickly through the orchard rows, hooking around to approach the front yard from the side. A decade of orchard tasks meant she knew where every tree's trunk, every patch of undergrowth, and every piece of equipment lay. This was her terrain. At the orchard's north edge stood an old barn, its exterior worn but reinforced inside with metal plating. Belinda slipped into this barn, where she kept not only her farming supplies but also a few tactical surprises she had built over the years. A narrow window overlooked the house, giving her a vantage point to see men funneling into the living room through the busted door. She lifted an old pair of night vision binoculars, confirming that at least 6 were inside now, with additional reinforcements lurking by the vehicles. Suddenly, she spotted something that made her blood run cold. One of the men outside carried a folded photograph. He was gesturing to it, pointing toward the orchard. Belinda recognized the shape. It was a snapshot of Victoria, probably captured at her high school or while she walked to the local store. They had done reconnaissance on her daughter. The sense of violation sparked the embers of fury that Daisy Quinn once harnessed. Her enemies were threatening her child, and that was all she needed to recommit fully to the fight. She remembered a secure radio from her old days, hidden in a case under a stack of wood in the barn. She quickly retrieved it, powering it on. There was no telling if her old IIS contacts would still be operational after these 8 years, but it was worth the attempt. She typed in an ancient code she had memorized. A beep confirmed the frequency was still live. She whispered, "Code Indigo, Agent Quinn requesting immediate assistance, location compromised, multiple hostiles on site." Static crackled. She waited. Another beep, then a cool, automated voice requested further authentication. She provided the codes, her heart hammering. Finally, a curt reply, "Authentication recognized. Stand by for response." The relief was slight, but real. Someone at the IIS was listening. However, she knew help, if it arrived at all, might not come in time to save her orchard. She had to rely on her own strategic advantage for the immediate crisis. Her orchard sensors showed more men entering. Gunshots echoed from inside the house, likely the intruders clearing rooms. In the barn, she retrieved a small rifle with a mounted suppressor. If she engaged them from here, she could pick them off, but risked exposing her position. Instead, she recalled an orchard utility route that ran behind the barn, leading to a drainage ditch and eventually looping around the orchard's rear boundary. If she circled behind them, maybe she could lure them further into confusion. She set a rudimentary trip mechanism near the barn door, a series of old metal scraps rigged to fall, which would create clatter if anyone tried to force entry. Then, stepping out through a side hatch, she vanished into the orchard's darkness again. Meanwhile, inside the house, confusion reigned. She heard the men bark orders into radios, referencing how they couldn't locate the occupant, indicating they were uncertain if she was outside or hiding somewhere within the property. One voice, deeper and more commanding, insisted they continue the search until they found the orchard woman in the data. Belinda guessed he was the team leader. These instructions confirmed that their mission was twofold: capture her or eliminate her, and recover that rumored flash drive containing sensitive details about Cartel Soberano's ties to U.S. officials. Belinda moved like a phantom through the orchard rows, a tranquil environment she knew intimately. The approaching footsteps of one intruder prompted her to flatten herself against the trunk of a large fruit tree. She held her breath as the man scanned the area with night vision. His boots crushed fallen leaves with each slow step. She watched his silhouette pass less than 10 feet away. Another step or two, and he might sense her presence. At that instant, The orchard's main irrigation pump hummed to life, a timed activation. The abrupt noise startled him enough that he whipped around, aiming his rifle toward the pump house, giving Belinda the opening she needed. She lunged forward, using the butt of her rifle to strike him behind the ear. He collapsed with a muffled grunt. Quickly, she bound his wrists and ankles with plastic ties, then removed his radio. She dragged him out of the orchard row, tucking him into a small ravine covered with dense brush. Taking a calculated risk, she pressed the transmit button. An angry voice demanded, "Report! Soto, what happened?" Belinda let the static hiss. Then she quietly turned off the radio. That would sow discord as they tried to figure out where their comrade went. Pressing onward, she heard more movement. Another pair of intruders, each carrying sidearms and scanning carefully, advanced from the east boundary. Belinda took cover behind an old irrigation tank. For a moment, her gaze flicked to the side of the house, noticing the glimmer of flashlights. So far, her illusions had kept them guessing. However, with so many men, the margin for error shrank with each passing second. Even a single slip could bring the entire group bearing down on her position. She considered whether it was worth trying to pick off the pair. One or two quiet takedowns might reduce numbers, but each engagement risked exposing her. Alternatively, she could continue to whittle them away with small diversions. Ultimately, she recognized that the longer she lingered, the more likely they would start a methodical yard-by-yard search. The orchard only afforded so many places to hide, especially for just one person. A better plan crystallized. She needed them to believe she had escaped entirely, prompting them to split their forces or chase a phantom on the surrounding roads. That might buy enough time for any IIS backup, if it was actually coming, to arrive. With that in mind, she slid into the orchard's drainage ditch, moving through water that rose to her ankles. The ditch angled around the western perimeter, overshadowed by a tall brush. If she made it to her orchard's outer fence without being seen, she could possibly cut through a utility gate near the county road and circle back to the property's far side. On the radio she had taken from the knocked-out intruder, she heard frantic exchanges. "We lost contact with Soto. Negative on occupant inside. We have minimal signs of a second occupant." That last bit made her freeze. They thought there might be two people. Had they discovered evidence of Victoria's presence? She couldn't take that chance. She had to keep them in the dark about her daughter as long as possible. Feeling a surge of protective instinct, she climbed out of the ditch and crawled behind a collapsed section of fence that she had intentionally let degrade over time, another unassuming defensive tactic. She heard vehicles rumbling on the main road. More backup for the cartel or possibly the local sheriff. In reality, Sheriff Franklin Davis had indeed received half a dozen frantic calls from townspeople noticing strange SUVs and suspicious men around Belinda's orchard. While Davis respected Belinda's independence, he couldn't ignore multiple concerns pointing to a serious incursion. He radioed for his scant backup. Two deputies, each covering different corners of a large county, hurried to converge on the orchard, but they were easily 20 minutes away, and no guarantee they wouldn't be outgunned. Meanwhile, Belinda found a spot behind an abandoned stable that backed onto her land. She observed as two additional SUVs arrived, their headlights dimmed. Out stepped more men, joined by a tall, lean figure with a crisp button-down shirt under a bulletproof vest. He carried himself with an air of authority, scanning the orchard with a faintly dissatisfied expression. He barked out in Spanish, "Where is she? The orchard is not that big. Find her." Several men answered in the same language, clearly deferring to him. Belinda realized he was likely a high-ranking Cartel Soberano lieutenant or perhaps second in command. Clutching her suppressed rifle, Belinda weighed the idea of taking a shot at him. Removing a leader often caused a domino effect of confusion in a group. However, a direct shot might provoke a massive counterattack, and she wasn't certain she could remain undetected afterward. She had to be strategic. She also wondered if he might hold crucial information, like the identity of whoever within U.S. law enforcement had tipped Cartel Soberano off to her orchard's location. If someone in the IIS or another agency had sold her out, that was a deeper betrayal than simply some run-of-the-mill corruption. Perhaps capturing him alive would reveal answers. Under cover of darkness, she repositioned herself to the stable's corner, scanning the house where lights now flooded from inside. The intruders clearly rummaged through her property in search of something. She heard one bark over the radio. "She's not here. Rooms are clear. Computer off." She left minimal personal items. "Feels like a ghost." That gave Belinda a flicker of satisfaction. She had always been mindful to keep her living areas tidy, with no obvious leads about her true identity. Yet she dreaded the possibility that eventually they might search thoroughly enough to discover the closet hatch and find Victoria. She needed a bigger distraction, something that would force them to focus on her location outside and keep them far from the house's second floor. She tightened her grip on the rifle, scanning for targets of opportunity. A few men were patrolling near a generator. If that generator was knocked out, the house would go dark, and the orchard as well. She reached into her pack for a small, homemade device fashioned from farm equipment parts, a timed electric spark tool that could ignite flammable materials when triggered. With care, she crept near the generator, placing the device behind a stack of barrels. After setting the timer for 90 seconds, she moved back into the orchard. When the explosion came, it was more of a loud pop than a massive blast, but it unleashed enough force to knock the generator sideways and plunge the orchard into darkness. In the sudden gloom, men shouted, flashlights flickered, and confusion reigned. Belinda used this chaos to her advantage. She fired one round to break a floodlight overhead, intensifying the darkness. She dashed behind a tractor, sliding in the mud. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained razor-sharp on her next move. Inside the orchard house, the men shouted over each other in frustration. The explosion jarred them further, revealing that this was no simple intimidation job. One demanded, "Are we sure the data is here? This orchard lady is more organized than we expected." Another responded that they had intelligence from a reliable American contact specifying that Belinda Ortega possessed a flash drive loaded with incriminating details about the cartel's finances and ties to officials on both sides of the border. Their orders were clear: secure the drive, neutralize any threats, and if possible, capture the orchard owner for interrogation. But the orchard owner had turned out to be far from the docile, frightened figure they had predicted. In the orchard itself, Belinda breathed heavily, crouched between rows of fruit trees. Though physically fit, the strain of stealth movement, close-quarter takedowns, and firefights was starting to take its toll. Her arm ached from an earlier brush with a bullet that nicked her shoulder, though the wound was superficial. Still, she couldn't relent. Victoria was counting on her. She had also placed a silent call to the IIS, hoping some form of extraction or reinforcements were on their way. If the cavalry did show, it might be too late to save her orchard from collateral damage, but at least her daughter could be safeguarded. Her thoughts were interrupted by the clang of metal behind her. She whipped around to see a figure creeping with a pistol drawn. The faint moonlight revealed an intruder's face twisted in concentration. Before he could spot her, she lunged low, sweeping his legs out from under him. He tumbled with a grunt. She slammed a knee into his chest, pinning him, pressing her rifle muzzle to his neck. "Who sent you?" she hissed, though the question felt rhetorical. The man grunted defiantly, trying to swing his pistol up. She delivered a quick strike to his head with the butt of her rifle. He went limp. Time was short. She had incapacitated several, but more than half the group remained operational and was almost certainly calling in backup, if not already in direct contact with a command center that had ears on the entire fiasco. Slipping deeper into the orchard, she weighed her next objective, securing the safety of her daughter above all else. Could she guide Victoria out of the house undetected? Probably risky. The orchard was swarming, and the gate was blocked by vehicles. Perhaps she could cause a large-scale diversion that would force them to regroup away from the house, giving Victoria a chance to escape. At that moment, she heard distant sirens. It was a faint wail, but distinct, carried on the night air. Either the sheriff's department or paramedics responding to calls from alarmed neighbors. The intruders heard it too. Their chatter grew frantic. "We have to hurry," one voice snapped in Spanish. "This location is compromised." The leader in the bulletproof vest cursed audibly, commanding his men to intensify the search. The orchard quickly came alive with flashlights slicing through the darkness. She heard the bark of orders. "Find the occupant now. Check that barn. Check inside the trucks." The mention of trucks confused her. Did they think she might try to steal one of their own vehicles? The sirens grew louder. Belinda reasoned that with more official attention inbound, The cartel might shift their tactic from capture to kill, ensuring no evidence tied them to the orchard. She had to move swiftly to ensure that if they decided to torch her place or set booby traps, they wouldn't inadvertently discover Victoria. Time was running out for a decisive move. Belinda made a bold choice. She doubled back toward the house, sneaking through an open window she herself had left partially ajar. The smell of burnt wiring from the exploded generator lingered in the air. Inside, the hallway lay strewn with rummaged belongings, signs the men had torn through drawers and cabinets. She heard them in the living room, probably comparing notes on her possible location. Her instincts told her that the crawlspace hatch, where Victoria was hidden, was still undiscovered, given that no commotion came from upstairs. She needed to confirm that quickly. With slow, deliberate steps, she moved to the staircase, staying close to the wall to avoid creaks in the center. She halted when she heard footsteps on the upper floor, accompanied by hushed voices. Her stomach clenched. Someone was upstairs, possibly seconds from finding her daughter. She tightened her grip on the rifle. Then the voices retreated, heading back toward the first floor. A wave of relief washed over her. It seemed they had done a cursory search upstairs and not found the crawlspace. She had no illusions this luck would hold if they decided on a thorough floorboard-to-ceiling inspection. Voices downstairs rose, as if the men were engaged in an argument. The team leader shouted, "We need confirmation from our source. If the orchard woman doesn't have the drive here, then we're wasting time." Another man replied that the orchard evidently contained sophisticated defenses, so something significant was definitely hidden on the property. Their frustration was palpable. The assault had not gone as planned, and the arrival of local law enforcement only tightened the window for success. One suggested capturing the orchard owner's daughter to force a confession. The leader barked an order to find the girl. Rage and dread boiled in Belinda's chest. She would not let them touch Victoria. Ever. The voices moved back into the yard, dividing into squads. From the second-floor window, Belinda peered outside to see 3 men heading for the barn, while others scattered among the orchard rows, presumably seeking her again or searching for a hidden trapdoor to a cellar. She quickly unlatched the hallway closet, opening the secret hatch. Victoria looked up at her with witty, terrified eyes, but she was physically unharmed. "Mom," she whispered, almost bursting into tears. Belinda hushed her softly and said, "We have to get you out. They're going to search thoroughly soon. Follow my lead. Keep low. No sudden moves." She helped Victoria crawl out, guiding her through the unlit hallway. Together, they slipped into the master bedroom at the back of the house, which had an external door leading to a small deck. That deck faced a section of orchard currently empty of intruders. The plan was to move through the orchard and reach the drainage ditch behind the barn, from where they could slip out onto the county road. Belinda pressed her ear against the bedroom door, listening intently for movement. Hearing nothing, she signaled Victoria to follow. Step by step, they crossed the short distance, their shadows flickering in the faint glow of moonlight through parted curtains. Belinda prayed none of the intruders stood in the adjacent rooms or outside the windows. Her entire being remained laser-focused on protecting her daughter. The deck's door opened with a soft squeak, sending a spike of worry through Belinda. She froze, but no immediate shouts or gunfire followed. The orchard's darkness looked almost inviting, promising concealment for their escape. Carefully, mother and daughter descended the 2 wooden steps onto the grass. Belinda motioned for Victoria to stay right behind her, letting the orchard's tall trees screen them from the house's vantage points. A cacophony of yells arose from elsewhere in the yard, a sign the intruders had discovered more improvised traps or were frustrated at not locating their target. The sirens grew louder, presumably just minutes from arriving on the property. Belinda directed them toward a cluster of tool sheds near the orchard's rear corner. Those sheds were arranged so that anyone approaching from the house side would face a maze of partly overlapping roofs and fences. The duo crept among them, careful to remain silent. They peered around a corner to witness a small squad of men scanning the area with flashlights. One pointed directly at the orchard's drainage ditch. Belinda held her breath, praying they wouldn't move closer. Victoria gripped her mother's shirt, eyes wide with fear, but trusting Belinda's leadership. The men appeared to be discussing whether to check the ditch or focus on searching the barn again. After 10 seconds, they chose the barn, leaving the ditch unchecked for the moment. Belinda gave Victoria a slight nod, and together they made a quick dash into the ditch. The water, though shallow, soaked their shoes. That small discomfort was a negligible price for slipping away unseen. Crouched low, they followed the ditch's path, guided by Belinda's memory of every curve. Occasionally, flashlights would glance across the orchard, their beams slicing through branches. Once, light passed so close to them that Belinda could see the individual droplets of water on the ditch's surface glimmer. She and Victoria flattened themselves beneath an overhang, hearts pounding. Within seconds, the light swept on, missing them by mere feet. Slowly they resumed. In about 2 minutes, they reached the orchard's back fence. Here, Belinda had previously cut a small opening behind an overgrowth of vines, precisely for emergencies. Carefully, she parted the vines and motioned Victoria through. It led to a narrow strip of county-owned land, lined by tall grasses and dotted with tumbleweeds. Another 100 yards beyond was the winding county road. By now, the sirens were obvious, echoing off the low hills. The glint of rotating police lights flashed intermittently through the night. The mother and daughter emerged onto the road under the blanket of darkness. They had evaded the immediate ring of intruders, but Belinda knew the orchard remained dangerous. The men would not just vanish because of police arrival. Some might retreat, others might opt for a firefight. She needed to find Sheriff Davis or whoever was responding, ensure they understood the severity of the threat, and prevent a bloody confrontation if possible. Cartel Soberano had the manpower and weaponry to overpower a handful of deputies. They wouldn't hesitate to do so if cornered. Stopping at a patch of tall grass by the roadside, Belinda turned to Victoria, cupping her face gently. "Listen to me. We're going to find a safe spot. Then I'll figure out how to handle this. Whatever happens, stay close. And if I say run, you run. Do you understand?" Victoria nodded. Belinda tried to muster a reassuring smile, but her mind churned with the knowledge that the orchard was only step one. If Cartel Soberano had pinned her identity as the operative who once seized that elusive digital drive, it meant bigger forces were involved. Forces that might include betrayals at high levels of U.S. agencies. Already adrenaline pumped through her at the thought of upcoming showdowns. But at least for the moment, she and her daughter were alive and free from immediate danger. Belinda Ortega and her daughter, Victoria, crouched together in the tall grass off the county road as the harsh glare of sheriff's vehicle lights finally cut across the darkness. The orchard behind them was alive with shouting men and scattered gunfire, courtesy of Cartel Soberano's infiltration team. Belinda's heart hammered, still locked in the dual mindset of a mother shielding her child and an ex-operative calculating angles of attack. It had been only minutes since they escaped the orchard property and left behind the chaos. Now they huddled by the roadside, deciding whether to reveal themselves to law enforcement or remain hidden. Sheriff Franklin Davis arrived first, his lights casting broad strokes of red and blue across the orchard's entrance. He emerged from his cruiser with a revolver drawn, scanning the terrain. Another deputy car pulled in behind him, 2 deputies stepping out with rifles ready. From her vantage, Belinda recognized the uncertainty on their faces. These men expected a routine disturbance, but the orchard was under siege by a well-armed paramilitary force. 3 of Cartel Soberano's SUVs remained near the driveway, and she could see silhouettes of gunmen weaving among the vehicles. Victoria gripped Belinda's arm. "They could be in danger," she whispered. Neither of them wanted to see the sheriff or his deputies ambushed. For a moment, Belinda considered letting the authorities handle it. After all, that was their job. But her experience told her they would be easily outgunned. A single mother's orchard was not supposed to be a fortress in which professional killers roamed the shadows. She felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't just about her life anymore. The local law was about to walk into a hornet's nest. Summoning her courage, Belinda rose from the grass with careful slowness, ensuring she didn't startle the deputies. She called out, "Sheriff Davis, it's Belinda Ortega." The sheriff whirled, aiming his firearm, but relief flickered across his face when he recognized her. Deputies took aim briefly, then lowered their guns at Davis's signal. Victoria emerged behind her mother, trembling in the night air. Belinda quickly closed the distance to the lawmen, speaking in a subdued but urgent tone. "Sheriff, they're cartel mercenaries, at least a dozen, maybe more. They're heavily armed and looking for me." One deputy's eyes went wide with fear, and Davis muttered an oath. Whatever he expected to find that night, It wasn't an international criminal outfit turning an orchard into a battlefield. Davis glanced at the orchard and back at Belinda. You sure about this? Cartel Soberano and San Esteban? She nodded vehemently. They're here for reasons that go beyond trafficking. They have advanced training, equipment, the works. Victoria's voice trembled. They were inside our house, going through our stuff. We barely got out. Sheriff Davis exhaled, rallying his composure. All right, we'll call for backup. State troopers, maybe the Rangers. But that'll take time. Another deputy muttered that the entire county force was stretched thin. The futility of sending a few more cars against a paramilitary group settled in the air. Mind racing, Belinda weighed the choice of revealing her ex-operative background. Normally, she stayed away from any mention of her past. But if the sheriff was going to survive this standoff, he might need more than vague answers. She steeled herself and confessed, "There's more to me than orchard work, Sheriff. I've got training, special training. I can help if we coordinate properly." Initially, Davis shot her a puzzled look. He had always suspected there was something unusual about Belinda, her uncanny calm under pressure, her built-in security habits. But he never pressed the issue. Now, in the middle of a potential firefight, he had little choice but to accept her help. Fine, he grunted, but this is official law enforcement. If you're assisting, you follow my lead. Belinda nodded, aware that the last thing she wanted was to appear as some vigilante. The next challenge loomed, crossing back near the orchard to either contain or repel the cartel force. Davis and his deputies had radioed for additional units, but the nearest were likely still 20 minutes out. 20 minutes might as well be 2 hours in such a fluid, dangerous scenario. Every minute that passed allowed the cartel more time to solidify their positions or even attempt an escape. Belinda asked Davis if they had protective vests. The sheriff popped his trunk, revealing a small supply of ballistic vests he and the deputies used on high-risk calls. Belinda pulled one on, adjusting the straps swiftly. Though it felt heavier than she remembered from her old days, it offered a sense of tangible security. She asked for a spare sidearm, but Davis insisted she stick with her own. I can't dole out departmental weapons like candy, he said, half apologetic. Belinda pulled out her personal handgun from a concealed holster. It would suffice. From behind the cover of the cruisers, they peered at the orchard's entrance. 2 armed cartel guards had stationed themselves near one of the SUVs, scanning the road with rifles. The orchard itself was dark. Belinda's earlier sabotage had destroyed the generator, but intermittent flashlights still roamed the property. She guessed the intruders inside were regrouping, preparing either to fight off the incoming cops or flee if that became untenable. Meanwhile, Victoria stood behind the open passenger door of the sheriff's cruiser, breathing hard. The strain of the night's events was evident on her pale features, but she refused to leave her mother's side entirely. Belinda quietly told her, "Stay low, keep behind the engine block, or the open door if shots start flying. No heroics." Victoria managed a nod, tears brimming, but her jaw set with determination. Sheriff Davis signaled to his deputies, "We'll try a warning call first." He raised a megaphone, voice echoing over the orchard. "This is the San Esteban Sheriff's Office. You are trespassing on private property. Armed and dangerous. Drop your weapons and come out with your hands up." A tense silence followed, interrupted only by the hum of the orchard wind. Then a single gunshot rang out, striking the ground near the patrol cars. The cartel's answer was clear. No surrender. Davis cursed and ducked behind the cruiser. "All right, that's it. They've declared war." Another deputy radioed for urgent backup, describing multiple suspects firing at officers. The stakes had escalated to a small-scale siege. For a moment, Belinda flashed back to an operation from her old life, pinned down by hostiles in a foreign war zone. She had the training, yes, but now the environment was heartbreakingly personal. This was her orchard. This was her peaceful corner of the world turned into a battleground. Shots whizzed overhead, forcing everyone behind the cruisers to duck. Davis's deputies returned fire, though the angle was poor and the darkness made it harder to aim. Belinda observed muzzle flashes among the orchard trees. Cartel Soberano was capitalizing on the gloom to keep law enforcement pinned down. The orchard's once gentle silhouettes had transformed into a labyrinth of lethal vantage points. Davis conferred with his people. We can't just charge in. My guys aren't equipped for a paramilitary assault. We hold position until reinforcements arrive. Belinda bit her lip. She understood his caution, but waiting could allow the cartel to slip away or fortify. She thought of the orchard's layout, a small service gate near the northern boundary that opened onto an access road. If they circumvented the main driveway, they might catch the intruders from the side, especially if the cartel assumed the threat only came from the front. But the risk of losing a deputy was sky high. "Sheriff," Belinda said, "if you keep them busy here, I might slip around and disable their vehicles. If they can't drive out, they'll have fewer escape options." She reasoned that, as a single operative, she could move more quietly than a group of deputies. Davis eyed her skeptically, but he also recognized they had limited options. "You sure you can handle that?" he asked. She offered a resolute nod, and the sheriff, after a moment of hesitation, gave a quick signal. "Go, but if it gets too hot, you pull back. Got it?" Belinda beckoned to Victoria, urging her to stay with the deputies. "I'll be right back," she whispered, trying to inject confidence into her tone. Then, staying low, she began her silent approach along the dark shoulder of the road, moving parallel to the fence line that enclosed her orchard. As she crept closer to where the vehicles were parked, shots erupted again between the cartel and the deputies. The volume of gunfire escalated, bursts of muzzle light flickering across the orchard. That was actually favorable for her infiltration. Every time a shot lit the darkness, eyes would focus on the firefight, not on a lone figure slipping behind the fence. Scaling the fence, she landed in an overgrown patch that led to the orchard's rear boundary. While she advanced, Belinda's mind fell back into old operational patterns. Check angles, watch for footprints, note distances. She recalled that half the orchard had turned into a swirl of confusion due to flares, flashbangs, and the generator explosion. So far, it seemed the cartel had not fully regrouped. If they had, she might be facing a highly disciplined perimeter. Upon spotting the parked SUVs, she crouched behind a low stone wall that divided her orchard from the driveway. Two men stood guard by the vehicles, scanning for threats. She steadied her breathing, feeling the familiar tension of a pre-combat scenario. Her plan was to disable the engines, perhaps by firing a few well-placed shots at the radiators or tires. That would keep the cartel from a quick vehicular escape. Another option was to slip under one SUV with a blade and sever critical hoses. But that required close proximity, and these guards were alert. Belinda waited, counting the guard's steps as he paced. With impeccable timing, she slipped from behind the wall and crawled beneath the first SUV, gently setting aside a tumbleweed that blocked her path. The undercarriage reeked of oil and hot metal, but it gave her the cover she needed. Carefully, she took out a small utility knife. Holding a flashlight in her mouth, its beams shielded by her free hand, she located the braided cables of the brake lines. In a quick slice, she severed them. A trickle of fluid dribbled onto the ground. She froze when a beam of light swept under the vehicle. One guard paused, shining a flashlight around as if suspicious. Belinda held her breath, pressing herself against the chassis. Another voice called from a short distance away, causing the guard to lift his flashlight and move on. Heart pounding, she resumed her task, slicing through the fuel line. Gasoline poured out in a pungent wave, making her eyes water. The SUV was effectively crippled. Slithering out on the far side, she scanned for the second SUV. It was parked maybe 20 feet away, with another guard positioned just in front of it. She couldn't disable that vehicle without drawing attention. He'd spot movement under it for sure. Instead, she decided to aim for a quick sabotage by bullet. She could put a shot through the engine block or radiator from a hidden angle. The risk was that the muzzle flash might reveal her location. As she crouched behind a trash bin left near the driveway, Belinda glimpsed a possible solution. A metal toolbox containing orchard tools lay just a few feet from the second SUV. If she could slide it under the tire, she might jam the axle. Not as reliable as engine damage, but possibly enough to immobilize the vehicle temporarily. She crept slowly, pulling the heavy box. Each scrape made her cringe, but she got it near the front wheel, tipping the box so that wrenches and hammers spilled in a wedge under the tire. It wasn't a surefire solution, but it might buy time if the driver tried to peel out. From the orchard came intensifying gunfire, indicating the cartel and sheriff's team were locked in a serious exchange. In a small lull, she heard Victoria shouting something, panic in her voice. Belinda's gut tightened. Maybe one of the deputies was hit, or the gunmen were making a push forward. Either way, she couldn't linger. She had disabled one SUV for certain, partially compromised another. That would have to suffice. She darted back behind the stone wall, taking a moment to catch her breath. Her arms trembled with adrenaline. At that moment, her old emergency phone vibrated quietly in her pocket, the one she had switched on after calling her old contacts at the IIS. She risked a quick look. A text message, in coded jargon, confirmed that a small extraction team had been deployed to her coordinates. So the cavalry was coming, assuming they could evade any double agents or compromised lines. The phone's message read, ETA 15-minute and maintain position if possible. That was easier said than done. She needed to get back to the sheriff without getting shot, all while ensuring Victoria's safety. Setting her jaw, she tucked the phone away. Returning to the orchard's boundary proved perilous, as the firefight had worsened. Davis and his deputies had taken cover behind their vehicles, exchanging sporadic bursts of gunfire with the cartel men. Occasional muzzle flashes revealed the orchard in abrupt, strobing glimpses, twisted fences, bullet-pocked trunks, shattered windows. Belinda circled widely, slipping behind hedges to avoid stray bullets. She saw that the front lines of the standoff were dangerously close to the orchard's main gate. 2 or 3 of the intruders advanced, firing with disconcerting accuracy. She heard a deputy shout out in pain, likely grazed or wounded. Another deputy yanked him to relative safety. Belinda's stomach churned. She wasn't naive to gun battles, but seeing law enforcement pinned down on her own land sparked a simmering rage. She had never wanted any local cop to risk their life here on her behalf. Yet the cartel had forced this confrontation. A well-timed lull in gunfire let her dash across the open ground. She skidded to a stop behind the sheriff's cruiser, startling both Victoria and the sheriff, who nearly opened fire on her before recognizing Belinda's silhouette. "Are you hit?" she asked Victoria, scanning her. Her daughter shook her head, tearful but unharmed. Davis frowned at Belinda, noticing her panting. "Did you manage anything?" She nodded. "Disabled one SUV. The second's mobility is compromised. They won't be leaving easily if they choose to flee by vehicle." Before Davis could reply, the radio crackled with frantic updates from the deputies. The pinned-down group realized more cartel gunmen had spread out toward the orchard side. Davis muttered, "They're trying to flank us. Damn it, we can't hold them if they spread around." Belinda quickly keyed her emergency phone. She typed a single coded update, revealing to her IIS contacts that the orchard was on the verge of being overrun. The response came swiftly. "Inbound now, stand by." She felt a small spark of hope, but also realized an outside team dropping in could produce more confusion if law enforcement mistook them for additional hostiles. She told the sheriff about the private security firm she had contacted. Although it was a half-truth, she didn't want to fully admit it was an off-book intelligence detail. The gist was the same: well-trained allies were coming to assist. Davis grimaced. "You have some interesting friends, Ortega. All right, as long as they're on our side, we won't argue. We need all the help we can get." Suddenly, the loud clatter of a helicopter echoed above. It soared in low over the orchard, nearly black against the moonlit sky. Spotlights from the helicopter ripped through the darkness, illuminating a chunk of Orchard Row. Cartel gunmen fired upward, bright tracer bullets slicing the air. The chopper banked hard, returning fire with suppressed flashes. The sheriff and deputies dove, uncertain whether it was friend or foe. Belinda pressed a hand over Victoria's head, keeping her low. Then a voice boomed over the helicopter's loudspeaker, crisp and authoritative. "Stand down, Cartel Soberano. You are surrounded. Lay down your weapons or face immediate action." Belinda recognized the type of approach: a specialized infiltration team with enough gear to subdue a small fortress. She exhaled a shaky breath. They had arrived sooner than expected. Sheriff Davis glanced at Belinda with alarm. "Who the hell are these guys?" He watched as the helicopter's spotlights tracked the orchard, revealing men in dark tactical uniforms rappelling down ropes. Each figure moved with professional efficiency, quickly establishing a perimeter. Belinda had seen enough special ops units in her previous life to identify standard infiltration patterns. However, she couldn't be entirely sure which faction had shown up. Were these truly the contacts she'd summoned, Or another paramilitary group with a different agenda? Davis's radio crackled. Sheriff, we have unknown hostiles descending from a helicopter. The tension shot up another notch, but Belinda recognized one of the repelling men's gestures, an old signal used by the IIS to identify friendlies. She raised her voice over the noise, telling Davis, "They're on our side as far as I can confirm. We need to let them handle the cartel while we secure the perimeter." The sheriff hunkered down behind the cruiser, still unsure but lacking a better plan. The new arrivals split into pairs, sweeping the orchard with night vision gear. Cartel men tried to regroup, firing in short, desperate bursts. Each muzzle flash drew swift, pinpoint retaliation. One by one, the attackers were pinned down or forced to retreat from their vantage positions. Victoria peeked over the hood of the cruiser in awe. The orchard was lit up by the helicopter's overhead beams, dancing shadows across the farmland. She had never seen such a concentrated display of tactical power. This was a far cry from the local deputies' modest attempts to contain a criminal threat. Belinda took a chance and sprinted across the gravel toward the orchard fence line. Two of the newly arrived operators spotted her, leveling their rifles, but she raised her hands in a sign of recognition, calling out, "Friend!" They offered a quick nod before returning their focus on the orchard's interior. One of them pulled down his face mask, revealing a man in his mid-30s with sharp, steady eyes. "IIS?" Belinda asked. The man nodded. "We got your signal, Quinn." He used her old code name without hesitation, making it clear that they knew exactly who she was. "Where's your daughter?" "Safe with the sheriff's deputies, behind the patrol cars. What's the plan?" The operator jerked his head toward the orchard house. "We need to clear the structure, gather any HVTs, and secure you both. Commander's orders. We also suspect they're after the flash drive you recovered years ago. We have to ensure it doesn't fall into their hands." Belinda inwardly cursed, realizing the worst had been confirmed. Cartel Soberano had discovered her orchard was the last resting place of that fateful data. She had always suspected the drive contained deep intel on compromised law enforcement. That was precisely why she'd locked it away in a hidden compartment in her workshop. She decided then and there she would retrieve it personally. Glancing over at the orchard driveway, she noticed movement. A cluster of cartel members, including the tall, lean lieutenant she'd seen earlier, had regrouped behind the half-disabled SUVs. She pointed them out to the operator. "They might try to flee or burn the place down. We can't let them do either." He gave a curt nod. "Go with Delgado," he said, indicating another operative who waved her forward. "He'll coordinate with you on clearing the interior. Watch your six." Belinda rejoined Victoria briefly to reassure her before proceeding with Delgado toward the house. Sheriff Davis and his deputies took guarded positions behind their cruisers, observing the surreal scene of shadowy operatives maneuvering with near-silent efficiency under the helicopter's watchful spotlight. The cartel fighters, for their part, seemed torn between continued combat and hasty withdrawal, but with at least one SUV immobilized, their options were shrinking. Approaching the door, Delgado signaled for silence. Belinda recalled her own orchard blueprint in detail, explaining quickly that the living room opened to a hall leading to multiple side rooms. They advanced, guns up, stepping through the shattered front entry. The inside was a mess. Bullet holes riddled the walls, furniture smashed, glass shards on the floor. The stale smell of gunpowder and overturned soil from scattered potted plants mingled in the air. They found two unconscious cartel men near the fireplace, presumably knocked out during the earlier chaos. Delgado quickly zip-tied their hands behind their backs, ensuring no surprises. Another operative moved into the kitchen, calling it clear. Belinda felt a pang seeing her carefully arranged home in disarray, but the pressing concern was the workshop at the back corner, where the flash drive might still be hidden. "This way," she whispered, guiding Delgado toward a narrow corridor. Before they reached the workshop's door, they heard muffled movement. Someone was inside. Delgado gestured for a stealth approach. Belinda tried the handle lightly. Locked. She knew a side trick, a small hidden panel in the corridor that opened onto the workshop from behind a stack of shelves. She led Delgado to it, carefully sliding the panel open. Through the dim light, they glimpsed a single figure rummaging around with a flashlight. Belinda recognized the man as the same tall, gaunt lieutenant who had directed the assault. He was rifling through boxes, apparently seeking that hidden compartment containing the drive. She gave Delgado a nod of confirmation. That man was high value, possibly the entire assault team's leader. They needed him alive for intel if possible. Just then, the man found something beneath a false bottom in a trunk, letting out a triumphant snarl. Belinda's heart sank. He held a small metal case, her emergency stashes of old intel, including the flash drive. "We have to stop him," she hissed to Delgado. The operator nodded, raising his rifle. They slipped into the workshop, hugging the edges of the walls. The lieutenant, fixated on his find, didn't notice until the last second. He spun around, lifting a pistol. Delgado fired a short burst that struck the man's arm, sending the pistol flying. The cartel officer dropped to one knee with a grimace. Belinda lunged forward, kicking the metal case out of his grasp. It clattered across the concrete floor. The man cursed, clutching his wounded arm. Delgado kicked the pistol away, then pinned him, barking orders in Spanish to cooperate. Belinda snatched up the metal case, her heart racing. A quick check. The flash drive was indeed inside. Relief surged through her, quickly followed by worry. The cat was out of the bag. Cartel Soberano knew it existed, and if they'd come this far, they wouldn't stop with a single failure. The drive's contents could expose not just the cartel's operations, but also corrupt American officials who had aided them. Once they had the lieutenant restrained, Delgado radioed for exfil support. Belinda took a shaky breath, staring at the battered workshop. She flashed back to the night she had first arrived in San Esteban, terrified and alone, after negotiating her exit from the IIS. Back then, she'd told herself she was done with covert missions. Now, with a single infiltration, that entire peaceful existence was undone. The orchard soon echoed with overhead instructions from the helicopter. All hostile personnel must stand down. Reinforcements en route. Surrender immediately. Gunfire tapered off as more cartel men were disarmed or incapacitated by the swift tactical team. The sheriff's deputies aided in cuffing those who surrendered. A few holdouts tried to sprint into the fields, but a second helicopter arrived overhead, shining high-intensity beams that lit the farmland like a sports stadium. Belinda emerged from the house to find a scene reminiscent of some clandestine raid. Operators in black gear guiding captured cartel soldiers into a line, weapons confiscated. Sheriff Davis stood in stunned silence, while a second wave of law enforcement from outside the county began trickling in with lights and sirens. The orchard was effectively secured. For now, at the sight of her mother, Victoria rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Belinda. The relief was palpable. Both of them were alive, with only minor injuries. All around them, the orchard lay scarred by bullet holes, scorched by flares and littered with debris. In the floodlights, the damage looked worse, but Belinda told herself it was a small price to pay for their survival. A tall man in tactical attire approached, a commanding presence that radiated authority even in the chaos. With dark eyes and a close-cropped haircut, he greeted Belinda by her code name, Agent Quinn. She recognized Director Rowan of the IIS's Special Contingency Unit. He had been one of the few people she trusted at the tail end of her career, though even that trust was complicated by layers of secrecy. "We're secure here," Rowan said, surveying the orchard. "We got your message, and the agency decided immediate action was necessary, especially once we confirmed multiple compartments of intel might be compromised." Belinda realized he was referring not just to the drive, but the possibility of infiltration by double agents within the U.S. The fact the cartel had located her orchard so precisely hinted at a leak high up in the chain of command. Sheriff Davis stepped over, frowning. "I don't know who you people are, but you've turned my county into a war zone. I expect answers." Rowan nodded politely, turning on a calm official tone. "We can't reveal all operational details, Sheriff, but suffice it to say we represent an interagency security group authorized to neutralize foreign paramilitary threats. We'll coordinate with local law enforcement for statements and detainee transfer. We appreciate your cooperation." Davis looked unconvinced, but given the extraordinary circumstances and how outmatched his department was, he relented. The presence of all the subdued cartel men, plus the advanced tactics, had provided plenty of evidence that something bigger than a typical bust was at play. Belinda pulled Rowan aside, handing him the small metal case. "They nearly got it. The flash drive you always suspected I had. Rowan's lips tightened. We need to see its contents immediately. If it's what we suspect, names of compromised agents, financial routes, smuggling data, this is bigger than all of us. The infiltration might run deeper than Cartel Soberano alone. Within the next hour, the orchard transformed into a flurry of official activity. State troopers arrived to support the sheriff, forming cordons around the property. The IIS special team secured detainees, methodically searching them for contraband and logging evidence. Some team members began analyzing the orchard's battered structures for signs of infiltration. One operator hammered protective boards over the broken windows, trying to shield the interior from the fresh dawn wind. Rowan commandeered a small corner of Belinda's living room, one of the few areas not entirely destroyed, and set up a makeshift command post with laptops and communication devices. Victoria watched in a daze, still processing that her mother was on a first-name basis with men carrying advanced rifles and using coded operational jargon. In a quiet moment, Belinda guided her daughter into the kitchen to find bottled water and a place to sit. "You're okay?" Belinda murmured, tucking a stray strand of hair behind Victoria's ear. The girl nodded uncertainly, tears threatening. "This is a lot," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I never knew. I never imagined you were—" "An operative," Belinda finished gently. "I wanted you safe. The less you knew, the better. I'm sorry, this is how you had to find out." Victoria inhaled shakily, but she didn't crumble. She'd inherited more of her mother's resilience than either of them had realized. As dawn approached, Rowan summoned Belinda to the makeshift command area. He pointed to a laptop showing an encrypted interface. One of his analysts had inserted the flash drive into a secure system to examine its contents. "We've confirmed these are official transmissions detailing high-level corruption, bribes, collusion, even assassination directives. Some of them implicate federal agents on the American side. Cartel Soberano wasn't just smuggling. They used infiltration at multiple levels, from local sheriff's deputies in bigger counties to certain personnel in federal border enforcement." Belinda paled. This validated her worst fears, that the reason she'd been hunted down was not only because of personal vendettas, but because the drive threatened to unravel a vast network of dirty cops and officials. "How did they find me?" she asked grimly. Rowan folded his arms. "We suspect an internal leak within the IIS or a partner agency, someone with access to your background and location. The cartel never gave up on locating the operative who took this drive during that mission years ago. Eventually, the right bribe must have reached the right person, and your orchard was revealed." Belinda's jaw tightened. So even my resettled life wasn't safe. Now we have compromised officials, cartel infiltration in law enforcement, and a farm shot to hell. Where do we go from here? Rowan's voice was resolute. "We'll take these detainees into federal custody, but that's just step one. We need to root out the infiltration. We also must ensure your safety and Victoria's safety. If the cartel was bold enough to send a strike team, they won't hesitate to try again. And with powerful allies in law enforcement, they could mount further attacks." He laid a hand on the metal case. "The information here can also become a key to dismantling the entire operation if we release it properly to uncorrupted channels. But doing that carefully, so it isn't buried or lost, is tricky. We'd need high-level officials we trust." By mid-morning, the orchard stood under partial lockdown as state troopers and IIS operators combed through the aftermath. The sun revealed an ugly sight: bullet-ridden trees, shattered windows, and the husks of 2 cartel SUVs. Local reporters began to gather at the main road, kept at bay by trooper barricades. Rumors spread fast in a small town like San Esteban. People whispered of a military incursion, while others speculated about vigilante violence. Sheriff Davis, grappling with demands for an explanation, eventually held a brief press statement, providing minimal details, claiming a joint operation neutralized a significant threat. He refrained from naming Belinda or revealing the deeper truths. The last thing Davis wanted was to feed the rumor mill that a single mother, living under an assumed name, had the lethal skill set of a black ops operative. Inside the battered house, Belinda sat next to Victoria on a sofa that was still intact, arm around her daughter's shoulders. A wave of exhaustion pressed on her. Less than 12 hours ago, she'd been planning a calm evening, and now her orchard was basically a crime scene. Still, the deeper blow was the knowledge that they might never return to normal. Another identity shift might be necessary, another relocation. Her orchard dream had likely ended. Rowan approached with a solemn nod. My team's done the preliminary analysis of the drive's data. It's explosive, names transaction logs, coordinating efforts, enough to shake up entire departments. The question is, how do we proceed? Belinda frowned. If we trust official channels, it might disappear. Whoever leaked my location could sabotage the drive or bury the findings. Rowan lowered his voice. I know a handful of people in government who maintain integrity. An intelligence inspector general, a federal judge known for exposing corruption, a couple of serious investigative journalists. We could orchestrate a multi-pronged release. That's the best way to ensure it doesn't get hushed up or used merely as blackmail. Belinda considered the cost. Such a release might trigger even more ferocious reprisals against her and Victoria. But it would also be the definitive move that finally shut down Cartel Soberano's infiltration. She nodded, glancing at Victoria. We'll do it, but we need absolute assurance that Victoria's kept safe. No more chances. Rowan promised an IIS protective detail. They would move mother and daughter to a safe location, likely out of state, while the drive's contents were funneled to trusted officials and investigators. The orchard would be left behind, now tarnished by bullet holes and tragedy. Belinda felt a pang of sorrow for the orchard she had nurtured, the place she called home for nearly a decade. In the end, though, no orchard was worth her daughter's life. With that decided, the mechanics of an exfiltration took over. Operators coordinated quietly with Rowan to arrange for a helicopter to pick up Belinda, Victoria, and the newly captured cartel lieutenant, who might be coerced into providing additional intel. Sheriff Davis oversaw the detainee handover process, ensuring each cartel soldier was documented. Dozens of agencies would soon scramble for a piece of this case. Finally, the moment came. In the dusty yard, Belinda embraced Sheriff Davis gratefully. Thank you for everything, she said, voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry you were dragged into this. The sheriff shook his head, clearly exhausted. You saved more lives than you know, Ortega, Quinn, whoever you are. Just promise me you'll set things right. She nodded, offering a faint smile. I intend to. Then with Victoria's hand in hers, Belinda stepped into the waiting helicopter. The rotor spun, lifting them above the orchard, the rows of trees growing smaller below. A rush of memories flashed through her mind. Countless mornings picking fruit with her daughter, the laughter they shared in simpler times. Despite her heartbreak, a steely resolve bloomed in her chest. She would see this through, exposing every dirty official and ensuring the cartel's grip on American soil was severed. As the helicopter soared toward the horizon, mother and daughter leaned into one another. Behind them lay the smoldering remnants of a life they once cherished. Ahead of them loomed a future where Belinda Ortega, also known as Daisy Quinn, was no longer invisible. She was a force determined to protect her child and uphold the ideals she had once risked everything to serve. In the end, Belinda's unwavering resolve and a mother's determination shined through every heartbreaking setback. Though her peaceful orchard life was shattered, she emerges knowing she saved countless lives and reaffirmed the crucial value of standing against injustice. Her remarkable journey from hidden operative to protective parent reminds us that courage and family love can illuminate any darkness. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What moved you most about Belinda's transformation? Do you think her decision to expose the powerful was worth the risk? Comment below to share your insights or questions. Together, let's discuss the triumphs, sacrifices, and hope woven into this story. And of course, stay tuned and subscribed for more inspiring and action-packed tales ahead.